In a world where wealth commands respect and trust is a currency few can afford, one moment can unravel everything you thought you knew. For Lily Carter, that moment started with a simple mistake, or so she thought. 1 minute, she was clearing tables, balancing plates, and dodging impatient customers, just trying to make it through another exhausting shift at an upscale restaurant where she barely felt seen. The next, she was staring at an expensive leather wallet, left carelessly on a table by the most elusive and intimidating customer of the night, Alexander Montgomery, a billionaire, a man who could buy and sell everything in the room without a second thought. She could have ignored it, turned it in, walked away. But what Lily didn't know, what no one knew, was that this wasn't just any forgotten wallet. It was a test, and the moment she made her choice, everything changed. Because Alexander Montgomery wasn't just watching. He was waiting, and what happened next is shocking. The soft hum of conversation filled La Belle Vie, an upscale restaurant where the wealthy came to indulge in fine dining. The crystal chandeliers bathed the room in a warm golden glow, casting soft reflections on the pristine white tablecloths. At a secluded corner table, Alexander Montgomery sat alone, stirring a glass of bourbon with an absent mind. His tailored charcoal suit fit him with the kind of precision that money could buy, but even beneath the finest fabrics, there was something cold about him, an emptiness that no amount of luxury could fill. He had stopped believing in people a long time ago. Not that he ever said it out loud, but life had made him a cynic. Everyone had a price, even the ones who claimed they didn't. He had seen it too many times to count. Friends who once laughed with him betrayed him for money. Business partners who promised loyalty turned their backs when a better deal came along. Even the women he dated, they weren't interested in him, only in the lifestyle he could provide. That was the reality of the world, wasn't it? Alexander exhaled slowly, his sharp blue eyes scanning the restaurant. Couples whispered sweet nothings across candle-lit tables. Businessmen clinked glasses over expensive steaks. But it was all a performance. Everyone here had an agenda, and tonight he was going to prove it once again. His gaze shifted to the young woman weaving between tables with effortless grace. Lily Carter, his waitress for the evening. She wasn't like the other servers here. Most of them were polished, trained to cater to the wealthy with forced smiles. But Lily was different. There was a quiet honesty about her, something raw beneath her polite attitude. Unlike the other waitstaff, she didn't flatter or fawn over her customers. She simply did her job, efficient yet warm, moving with an air of quiet determination. And that intrigued him. Alexander decided to test her. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his black leather wallet, and placed it casually on the table. Inside, there were at least $5,000 in crisp bills, along with multiple credit cards that had no limit. It was the kind of wallet that could tempt even the most morally upright person. Would she take the bait? As he took the last sip of his bourbon, Lily appeared beside him, holding a small notepad. "Would you like another drink, sir?" she asked, her voice soft but clear. Alexander looked up at her. She had striking green eyes, the kind that seemed to carry a depth of emotions beneath their surface. Her uniform was neatly pressed, though slightly worn at the edges, and her hair was tied back in a ponytail with a few loose strands framing her face. "No," he said smoothly, his voice low and commanding. "Just the check." She nodded and turned away, disappearing into the crowd. Alexander leaned back in his chair, watching her closely. A few moments later, she returned with a black bill folder. "Here you go," she said with a polite smile. "Take your time." She placed it on the table and began to step away when she suddenly stopped. Her eyes flickered downward, landing on the wallet. Alexander felt his heart slow. For a second, Lily just stood there. Her hand twitched slightly, as if debating what to do. Here it comes, he thought. Would she slip it into her pocket? Would she pretend she hadn't seen it and wait until he was gone? To his surprise, she did neither. Instead, she carefully picked it up, holding it in both hands as though it were something fragile. "Sir," she said hesitantly, "I think you forgot this." She held it out to him, her fingers barely gripping the edges as if she wanted no part of whatever was inside. Alexander stared at her, saying nothing. She shifted awkwardly, her brows furrowing. It's yours, right?" He finally reached for the wallet, his fingers brushing against hers briefly before pulling it back. "Thank you," he said, watching her carefully. Lily let out a small breath, as if relieved, and offered another polite smile. "No problem. I'll be back to collect the check whenever you're ready." And just like that, she walked away. Alexander narrowed his eyes, his mind spinning. She hadn't taken it. Most people would have, even if just a little. Maybe a single bill, maybe a credit card. But she had returned it, completely untouched. Was it because she was being watched? Did she know he was testing her? No. Her reaction had been too natural, too genuine, interesting. For the first time in a long while, Alexander felt something unfamiliar, a flicker of curiosity, a need to understand what made her different. Alexander sat in silence, twirling the glass in his hand, watching the way the golden bourbon clung to the sides before settling. His mind, usually calculating and one step ahead, was stuck on something he couldn't quite explain. She didn't take the wallet. It wasn't that he expected her to steal from him, not outright. But most people, when presented with temptation, would take at least a little. A few bills tucked away when no one was looking, a quick glance to see if anyone had noticed. But Lily Carter hadn't even hesitated. She had picked up the wallet as though it was something dangerous, holding it away from herself like she wanted no part of it. There was no greed in her eyes, no flicker of opportunity, just honesty. Alexander wasn't sure how to feel about that. He wasn't used to being wrong. Across the restaurant, Lily moved between tables, balancing plates with practiced ease, offering polite smiles to customers without the forced enthusiasm most servers used. She wasn't faking kindness. She was just kind, but he didn't trust it. People were only honest until they had the right reason not to be. Alexander leaned forward, pulling a few crisp $100 bills from his wallet and slipping them inside the bill folder. He had paid the check, but this tip was much more than expected, far more than she likely made in an entire shift. Let's see what she does with this. A few minutes later, Lily returned, scooping up the folder as she had done 100 times before. She opened it slightly to check inside, and for the first time that night, he saw a change in her expression. Her brows knitted together. A small breath hitched in her throat. Alexander watched, waiting. She glanced at him briefly before looking down at the money again. She hesitated for a moment, just a moment, but then pressed her lips together as if making a decision. Instead of pocketing the cash, she stepped closer to his table. "Sir?" He raised an eyebrow. "Yes?" Lily held up the open bill folder. "I think you may have made a mistake." He tilted his head slightly, feigning ignorance. "A mistake?" "This tip." She gestured toward the $100 bills inside. "I think you may have meant to leave a smaller amount." Alexander chuckled lightly. "And why would I do that?" Lily hesitated. "It's just a lot." He leaned back in his chair, intrigued. "Is there a rule against tipping well?" "No," she admitted, shifting her weight slightly. "It's just unusual." What's unusual about rewarding good service? Lily's lips parted slightly as if she wanted to say something, but she hesitated again. Finally, she sighed and gave a small smile. I appreciate it. I really do. But I just wanted to make sure it wasn't an accident. Alexander studied her carefully. And if it was? She blinked. If I told you I had made a mistake, he continued, watching for the slightest reaction, would you give it back? Lily's fingers tightened around the folder, and for a moment, something flashed in her eyes. Uncertainty, maybe even disappointment. I would, she said quietly. It wouldn't feel right, keeping something that wasn't meant for me. Alexander's lips twitched slightly. She was either a very good liar, or she really was different. He let a slow smirk spread across his face. Good thing I didn't make a mistake then. Lily let out a small breath, half relief, half something else, and nodded. All right, well, thank you. That's very generous of you. She turned to leave, but Alexander wasn't done yet. Lily. She paused, looking back at him, slightly surprised that he had used her name. Do you like working here? He asked. She hesitated, as if unsure how to answer. It's a job. That's not what I asked. A small, tired smile pulled at her lips. I like my co-workers. The customers are usually nice. Alexander nodded slowly, as if considering her words. And if you had the chance to do something else? Something better? Lily's expression shifted slightly. Curiosity, maybe a flicker of hope, but it was gone just as quickly. I don't have the luxury of thinking about that, she admitted. Right now, this is what I have. Alexander found himself intrigued by the honesty in her voice. No bitterness, no resentment, just acceptance. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a sleek black card with embossed silver lettering. He slid it across the table toward her. If you ever decide you want something more, he said smoothly, call this number. Lily glanced at the card, but she didn't pick it up. What is this? A job offer. She frowned slightly. Doing what? You'll find out if you're interested. Lily let out a small laugh, shaking her head. That's a little vague, don't you think? Alexander smirked. Life is vague. She looked at the card again, but something in her expression told him she wouldn't take it. At least, not yet. I appreciate the offer, she said carefully. But I don't think... I'll be back in a few days, Alexander interrupted. If you change your mind, the offer still stands. Lily hesitated, then gave a small nod. All right. She turned and walked away, the card still untouched on the table. Alexander watched her go, a slow smile tugging at the corner of his lips. She had passed the first 2 tests, but he wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. 3 days later, Alexander returned to La Belle Vie. He didn't usually frequent the same place twice in 1 week. He had too many options, too many invitations to exclusive restaurants where the staff knew his name and the chefs sent out special courses just for him. But tonight, he wasn't here for the food. He was here for her, Lily Carter. Alexander had spent the last few days thinking about her, more than he cared to admit. It wasn't just that she had passed his tests, it was how she had passed them, without arrogance, without hesitation. There was no performance in her actions, no hidden agenda. She wasn't trying to impress him, wasn't hoping for a reward. That made her rare, and rare things intrigued him. As he stepped into the restaurant, the familiar warm glow of chandeliers and soft hum of conversation greeted him. He scanned the room, his sharp blue eyes searching for her, and there she was, moving between tables, taking orders, her uniform crisp and neatly tucked. She looked tired. Not the kind of exhaustion that came from a long shift, but something deeper, something that weighed on her shoulders. Alexander took his usual table in the corner, and as if sensing his presence, Lily glanced up. For a brief second, surprise flickered across her face, but she quickly masked it with a polite smile. She approached his table, not rushing, not hesitating. "Back so soon?" she asked lightly. Alexander smirked. "I like consistency." Lily raised an eyebrow. "Somehow I don't believe that." He chuckled, resting his elbows on the table. "What do you recommend tonight?" She glanced at his untouched menu. "That depends. Are you actually hungry, or are you just here for the view?" That caught him off guard. He wasn't used to people calling him out so directly. He leaned back, amusement flashing in his eyes. "And if I said I was here for the company?" Lily's lips twitched, but she didn't take the bait. "Then I'd say I have other tables to get to." Alexander exhaled a quiet laugh. "Fine. Surprise me." She nodded, jotting something down in her notepad before stepping away. Alexander watched her go, more intrigued than ever. 30 minutes later, as Alexander finished his meal, he noticed Lily slipping out the back door. Something about the way she moved, hurried, tense, sent a spark of curiosity through him. He wasn't the type to involve himself in people's personal lives. He preferred observing from a distance, gathering information, and analyzing weaknesses. But something about Lily's quiet strength made him want to know more. He pulled out his black AMEX card, motioned for another waiter, and settled his bill. Then, instead of leaving through the main entrance, he made his way around the side of the building. The alley behind the restaurant was dimly lit, the distant sounds of traffic filling the quiet night. And there, a few feet away, was Lily. She was hunched over slightly, her arms wrapped around her torso, phone pressed to her ear. Alexander lingered in the shadows, listening. "I know, okay?" Her voice was low, strained. I don't have it yet." A pause. "No, I'm not lying to you, please, just give me a little more time." Another pause. "I swear, I'm working as much as I can, Her voice wavered slightly. "I don't have a choice, do I?" A deep silence followed, then a heavy exhale. "I'll get it. Just don't do anything yet. Please." Alexander's jaw tightened. When Lily ended the call, she let out a slow, shaky breath. For a moment, she just stood there, eyes closed, before rubbing her temples. Then, as if forcing herself to move, she straightened her shoulders, exhaled again, and turned back toward the restaurant. Alexander stepped forward before she could see him. "Rough night?" Lily jumped slightly, spinning toward him. Her eyes widened for a brief second before she masked it with the same calm expression she always wore. "Mr. Montgomery," she said, forcing a small smile. "I thought you had left." "I was about to." He studied her carefully. "Then I saw you out here." Lily shrugged, glancing away. "Just needed a minute." Alexander tilted his head. That call didn't sound like something small. Her jaw tightened slightly. "You were listening?" He didn't apologize. It was hard not to. Lily inhaled through her nose, as if deciding whether to be angry or not. Then, instead of arguing, she shook her head and let out a quiet laugh. Of course, the billionaire has time to eavesdrop. Alexander smirked. "You're assuming I have nothing better to do?" She glanced at him, her green eyes flickering with something unreadable. "People like you don't waste time on things that don't benefit them." "Interesting." Alexander stepped closer, his voice quieter now. "And what makes you think I don't see you as a benefit?" Lily swallowed. For the first time, she looked slightly nervous, not in fear, in uncertainty. Look, she sighed. I appreciate your curiosity, but my personal life isn't something you need to concern yourself with. That's where you're wrong, Alexander said smoothly. Lily frowned. Excuse me? He pulled out the black card he had given her days ago, holding it between two fingers. The offer still stands. She hesitated, staring at it. I don't need a handout, she said finally. This isn't a handout, he replied. It's an opportunity. She exhaled sharply, rubbing her temple. You don't even know me. That's what makes this interesting. Lily let out a soft, dry laugh. You really don't like taking no for an answer, do you? Alexander smiled. It's not in my nature. She sighed again, looking at him, searching for something in his expression. Whatever she saw made her shoulders drop slightly, as if exhaustion had finally caught up with her. Then, slowly, hesitantly, she reached for the card. Her fingers brushed against his as she took it, and for a brief moment, something unspoken passed between them. A quiet understanding, a shift. I'll think about it, she murmured. Alexander nodded. That's all I ask. Lily tucked the card into her pocket, then turned toward the restaurant, slipping back inside without another word. Alexander remained in the alley for a moment longer, staring at the door she had just walked through. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't just testing someone. He was invested, and that was dangerous. But maybe for once, he didn't mind. Lily stared at the small black card in her hand, her fingers tightening around its edges. She should have thrown it away the second she got home. But she hadn't. It sat on her nightstand all night, the silver numbers etched into her memory even as she tried to ignore them. Alexander Montgomery. She didn't need him. She had always handled things on her own. But last night's call had been a reminder that she was running out of time and options. The next morning, Lily woke up to a pounding on her apartment door, her stomach clenched. Not now! Please, not now! She pulled on an oversized hoodie and padded across the small space, inhaling sharply before unlocking the door. The moment she cracked it open, a firm hand pushed against it, forcing her to step back. Her landlord, Mr. Graves, stood in the doorway, arms crossed, face lined with irritation. It's the 15th, Lily, he said flatly. She tightened her grip on the doorframe. I know. I just need... No more extensions. His voice was sharp, final. You're already 2 months behind. Lily's throat tightened. I get paid this weekend. I don't want promises. I want rent. She swallowed hard. Please, Mr. Graves, I just need a little more time. His gaze hardened. 3 days, Lily. That's it. After that, you're out. She nodded stiffly, pushing the door closed before he could say anything else. As soon as it clicked shut, she pressed her forehead against the wood, taking a shaky breath. 3 days. Her mind raced. She could pick up extra shifts, maybe even borrow from... She stopped herself. She didn't have anyone to borrow from. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, snapping her back to reality. She pulled it out and flinched when she saw the name on the screen. Derek. Her hands trembled as she answered. What do you want? A low chuckle came through the line. Is that any way to greet me, sweetheart? Lily's stomach churned. Don't call me that. Relax, Derek said smoothly. I'm just checking in, making sure you haven't forgotten about our little agreement. Lily's pulse pounded. I told you, I don't have it yet. You're running out of time, Lil. His voice dropped, and for a second, she could hear the threat beneath the calm. I've been patient. You know I have. She gritted her teeth. You shouldn't have lent me the money if you weren't willing to wait. He laughed. Oh, come on. You were desperate. and I was helping you." She closed her eyes. "Just give me a little more time." A beat of silence. Then, "You know what? I like you, Lily. Always have." Her skin crawled. "How about this?" Derek continued. "We meet up tonight. Talk. Maybe we can work out a different way for you to pay me back." Lily's breath caught in her throat. "No," she said firmly. Derek sighed dramatically. "That's a shame, because if I don't get my money soon, I might have to start collecting in other ways." She gripped the phone tighter. "Stay away from me." A pause. Then, in a voice too soft, too smug, "See you soon, sweetheart." The call ended. Lily's hands were shaking as she lowered the phone. This isn't happening. But it was. She had 3 days before she lost her home. And less than that before Derek came knocking. Her heart pounded as her gaze flickered to the black card still sitting on her nightstand. Alexander Montgomery's number. She wasn't that kind of person. She wasn't going to run to some billionaire, take some job she didn't understand just because she was desperate. She could fix this on her own. She had to. That night, Lily worked another double shift. She didn't stop moving, ignoring the exhaustion pulling at her limbs, the way her stomach twisted from stress. She had to hold on a little longer. When her shift finally ended, she stepped out into the cold night air, pulling her jacket tighter around herself. She had barely taken 2 steps toward the bus stop when a familiar black car pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down and a smooth, familiar voice called out, "Need a ride?" Lily froze. Alexander. He was leaning against the driver's seat, one hand on the wheel, watching her with that unreadable expression. She exhaled slowly. "Are you following me now?" He smirked. "I was in the area." "Right." He tilted his head. "You look exhausted." She crossed her arms. "What do you want, Alexander?" He was silent for a moment. Then, "Get in." She hesitated. She should say no. She should turn around, walk away, forget this conversation ever happened. But she didn't. Instead, she took a slow step forward and opened the door. As soon as she slid inside, the warmth of the car wrapped around her, and for the first time all day, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Alexander glanced at her. "Rough night?" She let out a short, humorless laugh. "You could say that." He didn't press. Instead, he pulled the car away from the curb, guiding it smoothly through the dark streets. Lily closed her eyes for a moment, exhaustion seeping into her bones. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel completely alone. Lily sat in the leather seat of Alexander's car, watching the city lights blur past. Silence stretched between them, thick and unspoken. She wasn't sure why she had gotten in. Maybe exhaustion had won, or maybe, for once, she just wanted someone else to take the wheel. Alexander didn't speak right away. He let her sit, let her breathe. It was unexpected. Finally, he broke the silence. "Who called you earlier?" Lily's fingers tensed against her lap. "What?" "I saw you step outside again during your shift," he said casually, but his eyes flickered with something deeper. "Your face said a lot more than you probably meant it to." She clenched her jaw. "It's none of your business." His grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "Maybe not." A pause. "But I think you want it to be." Lily exhaled sharply. "You really think you have me all figured out, don't you?" He smirked. "Not yet." She shook her head, turning to look out the window. "I owe someone money," she admitted. "Someone who isn't patient, and I'm running out of time." Alexander didn't react. He didn't look shocked or disgusted. He just asked, "How much?" Her stomach twisted. 5,000. That number felt like a mountain to her, but to him, it was probably pocket change. Still, she braced herself for judgment, for pity. But Alexander only nodded, as if filing away the information. "Who do you owe?" She hesitated. Saying Derek's name out loud made it too real. "It doesn't matter," she muttered. "I'll figure it out." Alexander drummed his fingers against the wheel. "I could make it disappear, you know." Lily's head snapped toward him. "Excuse me?" He shrugged, as if it were nothing. "A single call, and whoever this guy is, he'll never bother you again." Lily's breath caught in her throat. Alexander wasn't just offering money, he was offering power. A part of her wanted to say yes, to let him handle it, to let the weight on her shoulders finally disappear. But she knew better. People like Alexander Montgomery didn't give without taking. "What would you want in return?" she asked quietly. He smirked. "Smart girl." Then, in a voice too casual, "Work for me?" Lily stiffened. "What?" "I told you before. I don't offer charity," Alexander said, "but I do offer opportunities." She narrowed her eyes. "What kind of work?" His gaze flickered to her, assessing. "Be my assistant." She let out a humorless laugh. "I'm a waitress, Alexander." He tilted his head. "You're sharp. You're quick on your feet. You don't crumble under pressure." A smirk played at his lips. "And you don't seem intimidated by me, which is refreshing." Lily swallowed. The job sounded better than she wanted to admit. It was stability. It was safety. But most of all, it was dangerous, because accepting meant stepping into Alexander's world. A world she wasn't sure she could survive. She exhaled. What would being your assistant even mean? Alexander took a turn, the city disappearing as they moved toward quieter streets. "You'd manage my schedule, handle certain calls, travel with me when necessary." His voice was smooth, effortless. "In return, I pay you well. Very well." Lily hesitated. "And if I say no?" Alexander glanced at her. "Then I drop you off at your apartment and we never have this conversation again." A simple answer. No pressure, no threats. But there was something in his tone. Something expectant. Lily bit her lip. She wanted to say no. She should say no. But when she thought about Derek, about the eviction notice hanging over her head, her stomach twisted. "You don't have a choice." Slowly, she turned to meet his gaze. "How much?" A glint of amusement flickered in Alexander's eyes. 10,000 up front, he said. 5,000 to clear your debt. The rest to get you on your feet. Lily's breath hitched. $10,000. More money than she had ever seen in her life. "And my salary?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Alexander smirked. 75,000 a year. Her heart nearly stopped. 75,000 for being an assistant. She stared at him, searching for the catch. "Why me?" He didn't answer right away. Then, with a quiet intensity, "Because I trust you." Lily's stomach twisted. This wasn't just a job to him. It was another test. She swallowed hard, her mind screaming at her to walk away. But her heart, her reality, knew better. Finally, she exhaled. "Okay." Alexander's lips curled into a satisfied smirk. "Good choice, Lily." Lily had barely processed what she'd just agreed to when the next day Alexander pulled up in front of a sleek, towering building in the heart of the city. "This is where I work," he said simply, stepping out of the car. Lily hesitated before following him. her sneakers making almost no sound against the polished marble floors of the lobby. Everything about this place screamed money. The walls were made of glass, the floors gleamed under the soft glow of chandeliers, and people in sharp suits moved with purpose, barely sparing her a glance. She felt completely out of place. Alexander walked ahead of her, not looking back, but somehow knowing she was right behind him. When they reached the private elevator, he pressed a keycard to the scanner. The doors opened with a quiet chime, and he gestured for her to step in. Lily took a slow breath and crossed the threshold. No turning back now. The elevator ride was silent, the air between them heavy with unspoken words. Then Alexander spoke. "You start tomorrow." Lily blinked. "That soon?" He smirked. "I don't like waiting." The elevator doors opened to a private floor. Unlike the sharp corporate aesthetic of the lobby, this space was warm. Dark wood, plush furniture, a massive floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city. His office. Lily swallowed. "This will be your desk," Alexander said, nodding toward a sleek workspace just outside his office doors. "You'll handle my calls, manage my schedule, and make sure I don't waste my time on unnecessary meetings." Lily shifted on her feet. "And what exactly makes a meeting unnecessary?" Alexander's lips curled into a smirk. "You'll figure it out." Before she could respond, the doors swung open, and a woman in an expensive pencil skirt stepped inside. She was stunning, tall, confident, the kind of woman who looked like she belonged in this world. Her sharp eyes flickered to Lily, then back to Alexander. "She's the new assistant?" Alexander leaned against his desk, arms crossed. "Yes." The woman raised a perfect brow. "No experience, no background in corporate work, and this is who you hired?" Lily bristled, but Alexander's smirk only deepened. "I trust her." The woman's expression faltered for just a second. Then she straightened, nodding once. "Well," she said crisply, "let's hope she doesn't disappoint you." With that, she turned and walked out, leaving a thick silence in her wake. Lily exhaled slowly. "She hates me." Alexander chuckled. "She doesn't hate you. She definitely hates me. She just doesn't understand why I chose you." His gaze darkened slightly. "And that's fine. I don't need her to." Lily wasn't sure what to do with that answer. But before she could overthink it, Alexander straightened. "Come back tomorrow at 8, sharp." And just like that, she was dismissed. By the time Lily got home, exhaustion had settled deep in her bones. But her mind wouldn't stop racing. She had a real job now, a ridiculous salary, a chance to finally get out of the mess she was in. But she also had Alexander Montgomery, an enigma of a man who seemed to be playing a game she didn't understand. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. She hesitated before looking at the screen. Derek. Her stomach twisted. She let the call go to voicemail. A few seconds later, a message came through. "You think you're safe now?" Her hands tightened around the phone. Derek wasn't going to disappear just because she had a new job. And something told her that stepping into Alexander's world wouldn't make her safer. It might just make things worse. Lily stood in front of the sleek glass doors of Montgomery Enterprises the next day. She gripped the strap of her bag so tightly that her knuckles turned white. It was barely 7:50 a.m., and yet she felt like she was already late. She took a deep breath. You wanted this. You agreed to this. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping into a world she didn't belong to. With one last breath, she pushed the doors open. The moment she stepped inside, all eyes were on her. People in sharp suits whispered behind their hands. Some just stared. She didn't need to hear what they were saying to know exactly what they thought. Who is she? What is she doing here? Why did he hire her? Ignoring them, Lily walked to the private elevator and scanned the keycard Alexander had given her last night. As the doors shut, she let out a breath. Just survive the day. When she reached Alexander's office floor, she barely had time to set her bag down before a voice snapped. "You're late." Lily turned to see the same woman from yesterday, cold, poised, and watching her like she was an insect. It's 7:58. The woman cut her off, crossing her arms. "You should be here by 7:45. Alexander likes people who anticipate his needs, not people who scramble in at the last minute." Lily clenched her jaw, but said nothing. The woman stepped closer. "You might have fooled him, but you don't fool me. People like you don't last here." Lily's fingers curled into fists. Before she could respond, a deep voice interrupted. "Margot." Alexander stood in his doorway, looking effortlessly powerful in a crisp, dark suit. His sharp blue eyes flickered between them, landing on Margot with quiet authority. She straightened immediately. "Is there a problem?" he asked smoothly. Margot hesitated, then shook her head. "No, sir." Alexander didn't look convinced. "Good." His gaze shifted to Lily. "Come in." Lily stepped past Margot, fighting the urge to smirk. Inside, Alexander gestured for her to sit while he leaned against his desk. "First lesson," he said, watching her carefully. "People in this building will test you. Some will expect you to fail, others will want you to." Lily swallowed. "And you?" Alexander's lips twitched. "I expect you to surprise me." Something about the way he said it sent a shiver down her spine. She straightened. "What do you need me to do today?" He smirked. "Eager. I like that." Then, without another word, he slid a stack of papers toward her. "Go through these. Prioritize what's urgent. Cancel anything unnecessary, and don't let anyone through that door unless I say so." Lily nodded, pushing down the nervous flutter in her stomach. "You can do this." The morning passed in a blur of emails, scheduling, and answering calls, until a familiar name popped up on her screen. Derek. Her stomach twisted. She hesitated, but something told her ignoring him wouldn't make him go away. She answered. A low chuckle. "Thought you could hide?" Lily's grip tightened on the phone. "What do you want?" "You think working for some rich guy makes you untouchable?" Derek sneered. "You still owe me, sweetheart." Lily's heart pounded. "I'll have the money soon," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Just give me time." "You're out of time." Then his voice turned cold. "Maybe I should pay you a visit. In person." A shiver ran down her spine. Before she could respond, a shadow fell over her desk. Alexander. His gaze flickered to her, then to the phone in her shaking hand. Without a word, he reached over and plucked it from her grasp. Lily's breath hitched. Alexander pressed the phone to his ear. "Who is this?" Silence. Then Derek scoffed. "And who the hell are you?" Alexander's expression didn't change. If anything, his voice turned dangerously soft. "I'm the man she works for, and I don't appreciate threats against my employees." A pause. Then Derek laughed. "Oh, I see what's going on here. She got herself a little sugar daddy, huh?" Lily's face burned with humiliation, but Alexander didn't even flinch. Instead, he smiled, and it was terrifying. "Listen to me carefully," he said, voice deadly calm. "You will not call her again. You will not speak to her again. If you so much as breathe in her direction, I will know." Derek went silent. Alexander leaned back against the desk, relaxed, almost bored. "Do you know who I am?" More silence. Then Derek muttered, "Montgomery." Alexander smirked. Good. That means you also know that if you ever bother her again—" His eyes darkened. "You won't like what happens next." Derek didn't respond. Alexander calmly ended the call and placed the phone back on Lily's desk. Lily swallowed hard. "You didn't have to do that." Alexander tilted his head. "Yes, I did." His voice was steady, certain. Lily had no idea why that made her heart race. That evening, as she gathered her things, Alexander called out, "Lily." She turned. He pulled something from his desk and held it out to her. A check. $10,000. Lily's breath caught. "The debt is settled," Alexander said. "Derek won't bother you again." Her chest tightened. "I can't." "You can," he interrupted, eyes locked onto hers. "And you will." She hesitated, staring at the check in her hands. This wasn't just money, it was freedom. Her throat tightened. "Thank you." Alexander studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Go home, Lily." She turned and walked away, but her heart was still racing, not because of Derek, but because of Alexander Montgomery and what he might want in return. Lily sat in her tiny apartment, staring at the check Alexander had given her. $5,000. Enough to clear her debt, enough to erase Derek from her life. It should have felt like freedom, but it didn't, because she knew Alexander Montgomery didn't do anything without a reason. And the worst part, she wasn't sure if she wanted to be free of him. Her phone buzzed. A message from Alexander. "Did you pay him?" Lily exhaled. She hadn't. The check was still in her hands, uncashed, but she couldn't tell him that. "Yes, it's done." A few seconds passed before another message came through. "Good. Come to my place tonight." Her heart skipped. She stared at the screen, fingers hovering over the keyboard. She should say no. She should walk away. But instead she typed, "Okay." Alexander's penthouse was as breathtaking as she imagined. Floor-to-ceiling windows, sleek modern furniture, a skyline view that stretched for miles. But despite its perfection, it felt empty, like no one really lived there. He was waiting for her by the bar, 2 glasses of whiskey in front of him. "Drink?" he asked. Lily hesitated, then took the glass. "Why am I here?" she asked, watching him carefully. Alexander leaned against the counter, swirling his drink. "You tell me." Her grip tightened around the glass. "You're the one who invited me." A smirk. "And you came." She opened her mouth to argue, but stopped herself. Because he was right. She had come. For a while, they just drank in silence. Then, out of nowhere, Alexander asked, "Why didn't you cash the check?" Lily froze. Her pulse pounded. I did." Alexander's sharp blue eyes locked onto hers. "Number you didn't." A chill ran down her spine. How did he know? He set his glass down and leaned in, voice soft but firm. "I checked. Derek's account hasn't received a single deposit. And your bank records? Untouched." Lily's breath hitched. He had checked. Of course he had. She swallowed hard. "I don't want your money." His eyes darkened. "That's a lie." Her hands trembled. "I don't want to owe you." Silence. Then, something in Alexander's expression shifted. For the first time, he didn't look like the ruthless billionaire. He just looked tired. "You don't," he said quietly. "Not anymore." Lily searched his face, trying to understand. Alexander sighed, running a hand through his hair. "My father used to tell me that people only stay as long as they need something from you," he admitted. The second you stop being useful, they leave. Lily swallowed. That's not true. His smile was bitter, isn't it? Her heart ached because she finally understood. This wasn't just about the test at the diner. This wasn't about money. This was about trust. Alexander wasn't testing her. He was trying to prove something to himself, that he was right about people, that no one stayed for him, only for what he could give them. And suddenly, everything made sense. Why he pushed people away, why he controlled everything, why he didn't believe in kindness unless it had a price. Lily took a shaky breath. "I don't want your money," she whispered. I just want you." Alexander stilled. His usually unreadable face flickered with something raw, something real. Then, in one slow, deliberate movement, he reached out and cupped her face in his hands. Lily's breath hitched. His touch was warm, steady. His thumb brushed over her cheek, tracing the faintest hint of a tear. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. Lily's chest tightened. "Neither do I." A beat of silence. Then, Alexander leaned in and kissed her, software slow, like he was afraid she'd disappear if he wasn't careful. Lily melted into him, fingers tangling in his shirt, heart hammering against her ribs. For the first time in years, she felt safe, and she knew. This wasn't a test anymore. This was real. Months later, Lily stood in the same diner where everything had begun. Only this time, she wasn't wearing an apron. She was sitting across from Alexander, who looked completely out of place in his tailored suit, smirking at her over a cup of coffee. "Still think I failed your little test?" she teased. Alexander chuckled, shaking his head. "You didn't fail." He took a sip of his coffee. "You just proved me wrong." Lily grinned. And for the first time in his life, Alexander Montgomery didn't mind losing, because for once, he had something to gain. Life has a way of testing us, challenging what we believe, forcing us to make choices that reveal who we really are. Lily Carter was never supposed to matter to Alexander Montgomery. She was just a waitress. Just another fleeting moment in a world that never held his trust. But fate had other plans. What started as a simple test, an abandoned wallet, an unspoken challenge, became something neither of them expected. Because Lily didn't just pass his test, she changed the rules. She proved that integrity still existed, that kindness wasn't a weakness, and that sometimes the people we least expect can leave the deepest impact. Alexander spent his life believing that money could buy anything: loyalty, respect, even love. But with Lily, he learned the truth. Some things can't be bought. Some things are earned. And in the end, she gave him something no amount of wealth ever could. Something real. Lily started as the girl he was testing. She became the woman who tested him. And that's the thing about life. You never know when a single moment might change everything. Here on this channel, we bring you stories of trust, love, and the unexpected turns that redefine our lives. If Lily's journey moved you, let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Because sometimes, one small decision is all it takes to rewrite your destiny.